Okay. All right, we're in lesson 20. We'll be starting with question 3 on lesson 20 on the miscellaneous laws, and then we'll be getting into lesson 21, our last 4 lessons there, and each of them are kind of a two-parters. So, so here we are into a section on the sexual sins, and which is a huge emphasis because of the power of the interactions that we have with each other and the impact that has in our lives. And God spends a lot of time being very specific about the way that we should treat each other, especially as it is impacting a man and a woman and the relationships that we have together. So, question 3, what other sexual sins were forbidden by God in Leviticus 18 and verses 18 through 30? And so we've talked about incest, and there was a whole section at the beginning of the chapter 18 on all of those things associated with that. But what are some of the other things? And just of the list of, there's a list of things that are there. Get me started on one there, Francis.
One that I cannot even fathom is that bestiality, when you were the beast.
Oh, bestiality, yes. That is on the list here, one of the last things that they deal with there. But so we've got the idea of bestiality, which is the act of mating with an animal. Then what are some other things that are on the list that he talks about?
Homosexuality.
Okay, so a lot of things having to do with homosexuality and the different aspects of that. There is some more associated with, again, the family relations. What would be one of the things that he mentions associated with?
You shouldn't marry a woman and her daughter.
Okay. So some of this to us sounds kind of strange, but in the world we live in and the world they lived in, this was not strange at all. These were common practices that were done, and of course, this is one of these practices were part of the reason that, in fact, God is going to be using Israel as an instrument of His for judgment on the people that are committing these kinds of acts, and why the Israelites, if they have never had any experience in this before, they're being introduced to things that they're going to see, and one of the reasons why these people, the people in Canaan, are going to be wiped out. So let me just go down the list here. Verse 18 talks about the wife's sister, marrying your wife's sister while your wife is still alive. Interesting. The words that God uses in describing how He feels about each of these is also interesting, and so I wanted to put that along with that. And notice this idea of uncovering her nakedness, which we talked about last week, is associated with that particular one. Approaching a woman during her menstrual cycle. This again is looked at as uncovering her nakedness. Having intercourse with your neighbor's wife. It talks about the man who does that is defiled by her. And there's a lot of other talk about you adulteresses, you harlots, and things like that, to try to describe the despicable nature of these kinds of acts that are outside of basically God's design of marriage. Then there's, of course, the offering of your children to Molech, the fire god of the Canaanites there. And that was talked about as being profane, to profane the name of God in doing those kinds of things. Lying with a man like you would a female. There's the homosexuality we talked about. it's talked as an abomination to God. Having intercourse with an animal, the bestiality that Francis was questioning about, that a person that does that is being defiled by that. Very similar, notice, to the intercourse with the neighbor's wife. Same kind of feeling associated with that. The female trying to mate with an animal, bestiality again, that it's a perversion. So all of these and all of the aspects, the different aspects of incestual relationships, improper sexual activity between or within a family is all covered there in chapter 18. So again, if you have somebody that's having a problem that you know is having a problem understanding the true nature of how God feels about this kind of stuff, especially in some of our denominational friends who maybe are looking the other way on this and still wanting to be, they wanting to shape God into their image, basically. And they have to do that. They have to change the image of God to be able to fit this kind of stuff into their religion, to be able to do that. Okay, question 4. How did God use Israel to punish the inhabitants of Egypt and Canaan? So we started giving a little hint on this, but how does God use both the evil and the good to bring about his judgments? And in particular, what does he say about the Canaanites here in chapter 18 that is both a charge to the Israelites and a warning for the Israelites? What is the phrase that is used in there that about getting rid of the Canaanites because of the abominations that they have done? No. that phrase is so far has been saved for people within the tribe of within Israel who are separated from there. But there's a particular gross kind of phrase that is used. Bill's smiling back there, so I think he's got it. Yes, okay. Or like Clarissa, what you said, spew them out of the mouth. The idea of vomiting and the grossness of that is an indication of how God looks at what they have been doing and the reaction to that. So you have the Canaanites will be in there, but there's the cautionary tale for the Israelites is that something similar could happen here. Let's look at this next question. How would following God's statutes impact the Israelites, and what if they disobeyed? Is what could happen to the Israelites any different than what God is using the Israelites to do to the Canaanites? Right. So you have right. So you have both sides of the coin are presented here each time as God, with our free will, which he has given to us, presents the decision that has to be made. And we have that in every circumstance. God is consistent. He always, there is a choice to be made, yes and no, left and right. All of those are in place. And so if they keep God's statutes and his judgments and don't do what the Canaanites have done, then the Israelites then will not be defiled. But uses the same phrase again, this spewing them out. We will do that to you if you fall into the same trap that they had. So question 5, what punishments are required for sexual sins and give an example of something like that. What's the most common punishment for sexual sins?
Death.
Death. Simple. That's the one. But there are some exceptions, and this is where we get into the phrase that you were using there, Gil, on this idea of being cut off. And so, who would be cut off by the people? They have in a couple of cases there are some particular situations that would cause people to be cut off, and then we're going to talk about cut off in just a second. But give me one of the things that you could be cut off from the people if you do this.
One of them, if a man takes his sister or his half-sister.
Okay, very good. Yeah. That and taking a woman in her menstrual cycle. Both of those, the idea of being cut off from the people for a particular period of time is in place for both of those. How about the penalty is that you will be childless. Childless. Okay, yep. Or even a man who takes his brother's wife in this particular case. Those are both, will be cursed with childlessness within that family. So, and how important was legacy to the ancient people? How important was family ties, family trees to the Israelites? How important was that within Israelite law, within the Mosaic law? As a matter of fact, we talked about the year of Jubilee, going back, people getting back to their native. What if you had no children? You see how big this one, how powerful that one is. So, again, just some examples, some differences, things that give us, again, a little insight into how God is looking at these particular things. Remember, God is trying to teach somebody who, from a maturity level, is kind of that of a stubborn teenager, okay? And you have this idea of some idea about the nuances of how God looks at all these things. Are all of them bad? Yes. God looks at them all the same. They're all sin in every aspect. But we were given emotions. We were made in the image of God. Those emotions rise out of the soul and the character of who we are. All of that is of the spiritual nature in here. And again, these things help us to understand a little bit more deeply about who God is and how he feels about things. Jesse, go ahead.
Well, I've always understood cut off, another way to express, to kill them.
Okay, we're now to this question. Okay, so go ahead. What does it mean to be cut off from the people? And
well, I thought
the way you're explaining it, yes, I've always thought of it that way too.
Okay, I didn't know if I thought your previous distinction. Here are some exceptions being put to death.
Well, this is the difference that I want us to think about. That's why this is a thought question. Because I don't have an answer specifically to this. But we know that God looks at sin the same way. But how does he feel about certain sins as far as the emotion that it brings up? Well, he uses different words to express the different emotions that he has. They're all, from a judgment standpoint, it's either black or it's white. But he then feels a certain way about this. Certain things really make him really angry, righteously angry. And other things make him angry. I mean, there's a difference in the way he brings, and so this idea of being Childless, that is your penalty. Being cut off, that is your penalty. Death, that is your penalty. Those have different nuances of feeling. And those words are used in there for a reason. The Holy Spirit gives us, through this language, an indicator. In this case, in the Hebrew or the Aramaic, basically what it is that God is feeling about this. And abomination has a whole different feel, for instance, than you'll be cut off from the people.
And verse 29 says, "For whoever commits any of these abominations, the persons who commit them shall be cut off from among their people." And I have a marginal note for cut off, put to death.
Yes. And I believe that is part of it, because what is death as defined in, what is that, Francis? Separation. It's okay, so the idea is that the separation is going to occur here. The ultimate physical separation is death. The ultimate spiritual separation is sin versus not being in a righteous condition, being in a sinful condition. And in between there, and we get the ideas of how God feels about things that are in there. The ultimate result is, well, I like Numbers 15, verses 30 and 31 as an idea to deal with this idea of being cut off. And let's look at that for a second. Numbers 15, verses 30 through 31, and notice I've got highlighted certain words in there that are very emotional words, okay? So it says, "But the person who does wrong," not just the person who does wrong, but the person who does wrong how? Defiantly does wrong, okay? Whether he is a native or a stranger, that one is blaspheming the Lord. That action, well, is he blaspheming the Lord? Is he saying the words? No, in this case, it's the idea of what does blaspheming the Lord mean to God? And you've got this idea tied to a defiant act, a willful act that's out there. And God looks at it as blasphemy to him. And that person shall be cut off from amongst his people, because he's cut off from God. And God wants to be with his people, and he can't be in the same place with somebody like this. And so since he has despised the word of the Lord and has broken his commandment, that person shall be cut off. His guilt will be on him. Now notice the word guilt in there. Why are there different sacrifices? When somebody cheats somebody, for instance, and you end up having to have a guilt offering. It's a sin, right, that's been committed. But the trespassing sin, the guilt sin, is a little bit different in how it impacts, the impact on people, the impact on your relationship with God. And so there's a different offering associated with that. All of these, when I'm bringing it up, and again, that's why this is a thought question, is we all tend to kind of read through things and kind of get used to certain terms and stuff like that, because we've always, looked at them that way. But when you dig into the texts in there and start pulling out these emotional things associated with how God feels about things, we come into a closer relationship. If we understand how somebody feels about things that happen, then we're in a closer relationship with that person. And I think, and again, this would be my opinion as to, I don't know why God used certain words, but it appears to me to give insight into that, into how God feels about that. And feelings are important. We act on feelings. We act on. We don't just act just based on right or wrong. That was the problem that the Israelites ended up having, was obeying the law kind of rote memory. I'm going to do it because it says do A, then B, then C, then D, but I really don't want to do it. Well, that's your feelings. And how does God feel about you feeling that way? It's like you didn't even do it. What's the point of even doing it? You know, so all of these things are important. I just want to encourage you, since we're studying through this right now, this is your opportunity to look at some things maybe you haven't looked at before and get some background on it. Question 6, what are the 2 conditions that could bring on the need for the adultery test? There's 2 conditions that could bring this on, and the Bible talks about both of these in Acts chapter 5, verses 12 and 13 is the first one. In Numbers 5, did I say Acts? It didn't sound right. We were studying Acts yesterday. Numbers chapter 5. For the adultery test to be called for, this is the first thing that God is mentioned.
To suspect his wife of unfaithfulness, I guess.
Well, this is a little different, because this is almost the cart before the horse. This is God talking, okay, about the way people act. Okay, so what in God's mind, he put the adultery test here for a reason. What's the, well, we'll talk about that in a little bit too. But there's an action that either occurred or didn't occur, okay? And now looking at it from God's standpoint, who can see everything even though man cannot see everything, in man's eyes there may be some questions because I didn't actually see this occur. But what is, in God's eyes, what has occurred? What's the first thing that, for the adultery test to be put into place? Yeah. This one caught me a little bit by surprise too. It's like starting at the end and instead of the beginning. Look at verses 12 and 13. Speak to the sons of Israel and say to them, if any man's wife goes astray and is unfaithful to him. Are there any questions there about what he's trying to say there? She's done the act, right? Isn't that what he's saying? If any man's wife goes astray and is unfaithful to him, and a man has intercourse with her, and it's hidden from the eyes of her husband, and she's defiled herself, she has not been caught in the act. So again, we're looking at things from God's standpoint. He's the one putting the adultery test in place. Who's the adultery test for? Is it for God? Who? Yeah, God already knows. Yeah. So who's the test for? Why did God have to have a test for the adultery? It says she committed the adultery. But what does it say in verse 13? She has not been caught in the act. By the law, doesn't she have to be caught in the act? Remember Jesus talking about the harlot in the New Testament? Well, apparently she wasn't, because he who is guiltless throw the first stone. There were no witnesses. There was nobody left to accuse her. Okay, but what happens if you have a situation where, in human terms, there is no answer? There are no witnesses. In the Mosaic law, you had to have at least 2. 3 would be better. You have to have at least 2 witnesses to the crime for there to be a crime. This is like I said, if the tree falls in the woods, did it make noise? If nobody's around to hear it, it kind of. God's around to hear it. God knows that she did this, was not caught in the act. God knows the truth. Okay, so this has to happen before the adultery test becomes even a factor. All right, so that, whoops. And if the husband then has a spirit of jealousy, enough so to call for the test. Okay, so he calls for the test because, now, could there be a situation where the husband is wrong about this? Well, yeah. It doesn't make the adultery test wrong. As a matter of fact, it makes it so that the adultery test can then prove that adultery did not occur. And the answer, again, the answer is given by God. Or if the result is that she did commit adultery, then, in fact, it's proven. And again, the same results. Now everybody knows. The intent of the test is to make sure that, why was this important? The importance is in keeping the congregation pure, even for things that are unseen. And this is something that would have been unseen. She got away with it, but not before God. And, how this all works from the standpoint of how it works, we only know that it worked. Because when done properly in these conditions, the truth came out. It's not like the Salem witch trials, back in the day where, she was a witch. Well, if she drowned, she was innocent. And if she didn't drown, we burned her. We're not talking about that. We're talking about God and putting in place something that, remember, he knows the truth of it. All he's doing is making it possible for the congregation to resolve the issue so that the congregation can then go on as a pure congregation. That's the bottom line. Does everybody see what we're talking about there? And how it works. God, it works. That's all. It's like the Urim and the Thummim. Doesn't explain how it works because it was up to God to give him the answer to it. Sam?
Why do some people use this passage, or rather how do they use this passage to defend abortion being something that God allows? Like, I don't read anything about there being a miscarriage or something. Is there a translation or path that someone would take to try to bend this into their argument? Or do you happen to know?
I've never heard this particular thing used associated with abortion. And the whole idea of life and life in the womb is where the abortion sits in the argument associated with that. God says very little associated with that. He says a lot associated with the idea of life and where it begins and how you should treat it. And so that's what we would use. There was no Mosaic law either for or against abortion. The closest you get is the Moloch thing, where you're taking the newborns and you're throwing them on the fire and that kind of situation. But there's no equivalent that I know of. Is anybody else familiar in their studies? Does that help, Sam? Okay. Yeah. The impact of, let's look at question 7. What was the impact of a person's hidden sin on themselves and the congregation? And let's give some examples from the Old and New Testaments on this. So first of all, what is the impact on a person's hidden sin on themselves and the whole congregation if there are hidden sins in a person's life? First, let's deal with the impact on themselves. You have hidden sins in your life. How does that impact you? Or does it? No impact at all? Okay, so it possibly may affect your conscience. There could be some guilt associated with that. All those are good things. Those are positive things that happen. It could have no impact at all, and that says something also as far as an impact on your life. Bill?
Relationship with God.
That's always going to be true. Yep. How about with each other? We all have our secrets. If we all have our secrets, nothing that we'll ever share with each other, and we all know that, what does that do to trust? What's the basis of trust? Honesty. Yeah. Having this kind of thing. And Bill, you talked about accountability with God. Ezekiel 18, verse 20. Let's go over there and read that for a second.
Ezekiel 18. Verse 20. Whoever's got that.
The soul who sins shall die. The son shall not bear the guilt of the father, nor the father bear the guilt of the son. The righteousness of the righteous shall be upon himself, and the wickedness of the wicked shall be upon himself.
Okay, so we've got the idea of personal accountability is front and center here.
How about the fact that the congregation is tainted? Remember what God said, "You shall be holy, for I am holy." So the idea of there being sin in the camp and nobody knowing, and all of a sudden, had that ever happened before, where God punished everybody for the sin of one person secretly in the camp? Yeah. Can you imagine being in the camp that day? Everything's going great. It's a beautiful sunny day, and all of a sudden, and you're like, "What did I do? What did you do? What did you do?" It must have been you, and then the fingers are pointing back and forth and everything, and yeah. I mean, there's nothing worse than that. So that is a significant input there. So yeah. So of course there's David and Bathsheba. There's in the New Testament. How about Ananias and Sapphira? Who knew about that? Yeah, God knew. That's right. Yeah. So again, these are reasons God put this in place. Question 8. God in Leviticus 19 provides laws for the running of a righteous and just society. What argument does God use to make his point that Israel should obey him? And I've got a couple of scriptures here just to look at. Leviticus 19 and 2. Speak to all the congregation of the sons of Israel and say to them, "You shall be holy, for I, the Lord your God, am holy." And then in verse 37, the end of the chapter, "So shall you keep all of my statutes and all of my ordinance and do them. I am the Lord." You notice he starts with "I am the Lord." He ends with "I am the Lord." If there's any question at all in the things that are in between those statements, the bottom line is "I am the Lord." And you need to do them. And so these laws are in place for two reasons. One, for the purpose of the people being able to live a godly, righteous life. With that will be blessings and beauty and milk and honey and all the good things. Every good thing that comes from God is associated with putting your life in tune with the creation and the Creator, and just having that run that way. And then the other side is, You do it because he's God. He's God. And that's the reason. If there was no other reason, that would be the reason. And it's a great reason. I mean, because when you're talking about God, you're talking about eternity and all of that. So, let's question 9. Compare Jesus' argument in Matthew 5, verses 38 through 40, with Leviticus chapter 19, verses 17 and 18, and 33 and 34. What kind of example are God's people supposed to be concerning our relationships with our fellow man?
Love your neighbor.
Love your neighbor as yourself. Okay, that's like
the overall thing. Don't hate others in your heart. Love them. Reprove others' mistakes. Don't sin yourself in doing that. Fellow countrymen and strangers. This was all for. You're supposed to treat everybody the same, whether you're a fellow countryman or a stranger. Of course, whether they're wealthy or needy, you treat them the same. Whether they hurt you or helped you, you treat them the same. They're all the same. The question is why? Why? Why does God say you need to treat everybody in the same way that you would like to be treated?
yes,
But who were the Israelites?
prior to this.
They had been slaves.
They're just a bunch of slaves in Egypt.
Yeah. Who brought them out of that and made them into a great nation and gave them laws, the best laws on earth that were there for them to live by? God did. Yeah, that's right. And so, making the point to them, you were aliens and slaves, and I'm the Lord. That should be the end of it. The way that is enough said, basically. Okay, so that's number lesson 20. So let's go on to lesson 21. All right, so we're now in lesson 21, and we're talking about specifically the numbering and the organizing of the people. And this part's going to be split up into two different parts, and it'll be known as lesson 21 and lesson 22. So let's get to this first question. What part of the population of the nation of Israel was counted in the census of Numbers chapter 1? What part was counted? And then we, as a result of knowing what part, we know why this census was necessary.
Okay, say that again.
Over 20.
20 years and above.
Okay, so specifically, they had to be fit for war.
Okay, so they're looking for men who were able to go to war between the ages of 20 and up. Okay, so now there's a slight mistake in the book here on page 139 where it says, quoting, it says, count every male above the age of 20. But the Bible actually says age 20 and up. So they're just missing, it's a small mistake, but they're missing a year. The 20-year-olds counted, not the 21 and up. So let's see. What parts of the population were not counted then? If those were the ones that were counted, what parts of the population were not counted? So who would have been included in the list of not counted people?
What's that? April?
The Levites.
The Levites, yes.
Who else?
Children.
Women, children, and
People below the age of 20.
Good.
Unfit fighters. Unfit.
Yeah,
Well, the ones that couldn't fight weren't physically qualified, okay, to fight. So the old and the disabled were not included in that. Okay, so question 2, how were the tribes arranged when they camped? And you should have drawn a little diagram on your paper for that to remind you. And then which tribes or divisions, they've been called different things. We're going to use tribes most of the time. Which tribes led the 4 camps on the 4 sides of the tabernacle? So let's go for the east side first. Who would have been over on the east side? Okay, so you got the Judah camp, right? So you had 4 camps, one for each north, south, east, and west, and you had 12 tribes, or they're also described as armies, so that they would say the army of Dan. And so another way of describing it, armies, division, or tribe. We're going to use tribes because it's familiar. And on the east side, so you had Judah. The yellow represents the leaders of the camp, okay? And the numbers up here are the numbers of warriors, 20 and up, that they found within each of those, and this is the total. So you can see 186,400 were in the camp of Judah, which camped to the east of the tabernacle. Now, how they camped within there, whether Judah was here and Issachar was here and Zebulun was there, or Judah was there, or they were like this, or whatever, Bible gives us no idea. Something that the book says is it says Judah camped closest to the entrance. I can't find anything in the Bible that says Judah camped closest to the entrance. All we know, this is all the information we're given. So it's enough to know that within the camp to the east is the camp of Judah. Okay, then to the south, you had the camp of Reuben, 151,000 plus. Then to the west, you had the smallest group, which was the camp of Ephraim, with Manasseh and Benjamin with them, 108,000. And then 157,000 to the north, and that's the camp of Dan, Asher, and Naphtali. So as we look around, we see the 4 different camps, okay? So question 3 here, why were the Levites not included in the Numbers 1 census? Who was the Numbers 1 census for? We talked about it already. Men of war, okay. Levites, hey, were the Levites opposed to war? Who remembers the last time the Levites fought for somebody? It was like a year before this, and they were at the foot of Mount Sinai, and there was this little calf that just kind of sprang up out of the fire, so says Aaron, and they were all having a party time around it, and there was a certain group of people that stood with Moses that day. Who was that? The Levites, yeah. So they're not opposed to war. Okay, so this is where we're going to start on next week, question 3. And we're starting with this idea of why were the Levites not included in this first one. And we'll start with that and press on. And good, thanks for the class.